Welcome, lads. Welcome to Drones Down Under podcast. We've got 4 exciting episodes on asset inspection. So, hey, Ty. Hey, Danny.
Yo,
Howdy.
how's it going?
Very good. Very good. So, episode 1, we're going to give a bit of an introduction to what is asset inspection and our understanding of how you go about inspecting assets traditionally and how you would go about inspecting assets using drones. So, lads, what do we think? How would we go about inspecting an asset before using drones?
With a long list of very painful escapades, cherry pickers, abseiling, scaffolding. What else, Danny?
Folders full of problems, pretty much.
Exactly.
Asset managers taking photos with iPhones, which I've seen people under bridges taking photos on their phones. That sensor in your phone ain't big and ain't going to hold much data.
No. And definitely a lot of the man-powered ways of doing asset inspection. There's obviously a lot of expenses involved and a lot of safety hazards involved, as well as probably where the expenses come in as well for the inspectors.
And the speed of it as well. Like that's very
that's
slow.
it.
Tedious.
I love the fact that we can actually help with the safety aspect. I think that's the most prominent thing that we can, obviously with this industry, save someone actually going through all the job safety and risk assessments and then having human life potentially exposed or at least seriously injured.
Exactly. Like, have you ever had to climb to the top of a telco tower? I haven't, but it looks pretty sketchy.
No, especially if it's on.
And that's what they call danger pay.
But where's the fun in that?
Well, depends how crazy you are, but no, there's definitely taking on to the more modern ways of asset inspection. There's a lot of safety factors that come into play that make it a lot safer for the inspectors and the SMEs out there to get the job done.
And even the potentially the forced shutdowns, right? So whatever that asset is now, with, like you said, telco tower, you want to inspect it. You can't send someone up there while it's functioning naturally.
No.
So
you're practically sending them into the middle of a nuclear reactor almost.
Pretty close. I wouldn't want to stand there voluntarily, that's for sure.
Nope.
So can we talk about some of the advantages of inspecting assets using drones? What are your thoughts?
Aside from safety, straight off the bat, the speed. You're getting jobs done in. You could be on site for an hour for some jobs, where not the general inspection might be on site for a day or even a week, depending on what the asset is. It could be a whole bridge or something. Some bridges are kilometers long. How long would that take to model by hand?
Even thinking about tall buildings, Danny, you think of a massive, 100-story building kind of thing, to abseil down, take the photos of any defects they find and all the rest of it. That easily takes them the better part of a week. Whereas, with a drone, generally what can be done half a day, full day in extreme circumstances.
You know very well with that when it comes to CBD shutdowns. Master of CBDs and drones.
Once. Soon to be maybe twice.
Very nice. It's still once more than a lot of people.
But it's an undertaking even as a pilot, but it's still so much quicker and so much safer, and particularly the time and cost effective side of it is insane. The cost difference between, say, getting one of us as a pilot and then their team to go there and put all their safety measures in place and fly a building, compared to getting someone up on a roof and harnesses, and it's such a better option.
And you're not really putting someone who's highly skilled, obviously, like some sort of engineer to go and look there, or so that they can sort of work from an office as opposed to trying to do that at heights and risking themselves, as we already talked about. So
and then you think about it, if they're coming down on, say, some scaffolding at level 3 or span whatever. They're taking one small photo on their phone, where when an engineer comes out to have a look at that data, if they miss where that one small photo was, they're going to go back to the data to try and find it again. When drone data is all, GPS tagged exactly where it is.
Yeah.
And it's repeatable, definitely. I guess. That's another.
Exactly. The joys of running automated missions. You just hit go every single time.
Yeah,
Yep.
and being able to replicate it in such a short time frame as well is quite incredible. I mean, even when you look at some of the options for asset inspection in the RPAS and drone world, even just the turnaround time in getting that data to inspectors and SMEs to get their job done. I mean, we can turn that around so much goddamn quicker than having to do the whole reporting process from scratch. It's just it's a massive undertaking. Just sometimes don't think people realize how much work is involved in the job, particularly doing asset inspection by hand or manually. It's a massive job.
Yeah. Well, this is, I guess, when it comes to the new generation of technology and everything, and I hate using this term, but trying to teach the old dinosaurs the new way of doing things. Once you get them across the line, they see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's amazing. Step into the light.
Yeah, they do. They definitely do. I think, like anything with new technology, I mean, there's still a lot of people that don't understand the perks of what you can do in drones and photogrammetry. And I'm sure we've all noticed it, in all honesty, putting it out there. I mean, you get quite a few people that look at you with kind of birds twinkling around their head, not really understanding anything you've just said. But the more you can sort of sit down, show them and give a really good explanation into how to use the products and use the data that they've been provided, they all of a sudden you watch their eyes light up. It saves a lot of time and money and stress.
Lights up with dollar signs.
Yeah, that too.
I mean, let's look at obviously what's going on now with Queensland and north part of New South Wales. I'm not sure how much further it's come down. Again, if there was some sort of capture of a lot of those assets, right, infrastructure, probably aid with planning, going to have all the lower points that they know it's potentially at risk of flooding. Could have been better organized, in my opinion. So
yeah, look, definitely. I'm actually surprised. Well, I mean, I don't know how deep they are into the project, but with the Digital Twin New South Wales project, they are planning to map the entire state. Whether any of the flood affected areas in New South Wales actually had those areas done in the digital twin and whether they are using them. I mean, I'm not entirely sure how far they were into the project, but there's a high possibility of that. But that's definitely something else in regards to the modelling as well. It doesn't always necessarily have to be buildings, but areas as well can be used in the same setup as well.
Yeah.
But obviously we're poking more towards the asset inspection itself.
I guess one of the other main points we've want to touch on is that reduction in carbon footprint, right? So obviously, if like we said, if people aren't the experts that need to be on site to do their work, working from the office, that's obviously a significant improvement as well, right? You'll have probably different sets of skills that need to be there to conduct the inspection. I guess that's a huge reduction as well, right? Because we're going to repeat that process using drones.
With everyone now working from home, since the pandemic hit, it saves so much more time now. Everyone can actually stay working at home, all these inspectors, instead of having to drive to and from every different site. And after all these floods and whatnot and natural disasters, having a digital twin of all these assets would just save time and money. That's the biggest two things: time and money saved.
That's it. And time is money, Danny.
Exactly.
Especially in
money is the root of all evil.
And money is the root of all evil, 100%. But no, it's definitely that. Those are probably some of the biggest things. Is the safety, the cost, and the time. All three of those things are probably, in my opinion, the hugest factors involved with going from your standard manual type of asset management and inspection, moving into more of an RPAS and UAV world. And obviously, too, that we know from doing assets ourselves that, it's not always just drones we use. I mean, primarily, but there's a lot of mixed media as well that we use for photogrammetry and for inspections as well. But there's a lot of time and money to be saved there by skills like ours.
So there's a couple of different terms that we use. So we're flying our drones. We've talked about the benefits of using drones for asset inspection. What's some of the we hear RTK, you hear about PPK. What are your thoughts on these sorts of things? Where are the benefits? because obviously one of the challenges, I think, people moving from the traditional means of capture to using asset inspection using drones, probably thinking it's not accurate. Can I do my measurements on these models? So do we start with what's RTK and how that might be beneficial, or do you want me to talk about what RTK is?
Well, you can pronounce it and you explain it better, Sean. So how about you explain it?
Awesome.
All I can tell you is one's real time and one's post processing. So
awesome.
So
RTK, real time kinematic, as I just briefly told us. It's using a base station, to put it simply, and something like in DJI's case, using a DRTK2 base station, and that'll talk to multiple satellites, which typically increases the number of satellite connections. So let's say you fly a non-RTK drone, like a Mavic 2, a Mavic 3, whatever it may be, you might be getting somewhere between 8 and maybe at best about 15, 16 satellites.
Yeah.
Something like an RTK, you'll be getting 25. I've personally seen up to about 44 satellites. You're going to get much more stability of the drone, which will obviously be much more responsive too. So with RTK, what's happening is that base station is constantly updating the position of the drone. So even though the drone may think it's in a position, it's real time being updated by that base station. The benefit of that compared to PPK is you reduce your post-processing effort, provided you can prove that real time is actually correct. Now with PPK, as Ty highlighted, post-processing, so you might use something like ground control points to update the horizontal positioning of the location, or do a whole correction in post. So most surveyors tend to use ground control, which you might see it's a white and black type grid, or it'll be a spray of an X, and then we'll take that position using some sort of survey equipment. We tend to use something like an MLED Reach RS2, and then we use that while we're actually processing to create the models. We'll tend to use ground control to do correction. So if you tend to do any kind of correction, that would be post-processing. So,
and the ground control points are generally about 0.5 meter wide, aren't they?
Yeah, you want it relatively large because you're trying to see that potentially from anywhere up to 80 to 100 meters in the air. So
yeah, exactly.
You may come down to get further detail, but depending on the size of the acreage, you can't always fly at 30, 40 meters. You might be there for a few days. So, so I think as far as accuracy is concerned, you can definitely get certainly between 20 to 30 centimeters on its horizontal accuracy as well as its vertical accuracy. And what I've seen in our experience is usually with RTK, it's the vertical accuracy that tends to be the one that we have to correct. So it's just like a mobile phone. Like we had a phone in our pocket, and the phone thinks it's in this position. It's usually about 3 meters out, or maybe even more.
Yeah.
However, with an RTK drone, it's within a foot. So I think that's usually lat and longs are pretty good. It's the height that tends to always be completely off in our experience. So yeah, it's, and we can obviously prove positioning by using ground control like we talked, and I'm sure we'll go further into that into the next few episodes, but these are some things probably worth looking into further, or if you want us to talk more about it, certainly write in the comments once it's posted in the episode, and more than happy to share some information about it.
Definitely, it's a good reminder for the listeners. If there is stuff you want more explanation on, or stuff you want us to cover, please feel free to reach out. We are an open book, and we'd love to hear what our listeners want to hear as well. If there's information you guys want to know or want to learn about, please throw us a line. We're happy to have a chat. So,
Danny, I know you tend to fly the 300 a fair bit with RTK.
Yep.
What's your experience been with it? Like, how do you find stability, connectivity?
the
What do you?
hands down, the stability of the drone is just unparalleled when you're using the M300. It's almost like it has just a much better, as we say, GPS lock. And the data is a lot easier to deal with afterwards because the actual RTK, so the M300 actually timestamps all the information to your photos, where the earlier models, like say the M200s, never actually did that.
Yeah,
it just makes the post processing much faster and more streamlined.
So from the base station, have you got an idea how far the drone, like what's the furthest you've traveled from the base station?
Probably about 700 to 800 meters would be, I'd probably say, pushing the max.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's people out there who pushed further, but I'd like to keep a line of sight of the drone.
Yeah, we've done probably about 600 and it's been good, but so I think, I agree with you. It's probably about 700 to 800 probably as, knowing you, it makes sense you're saying 700 to 800. So
yeah, I mean, it gets pretty hard for the listeners out there that maybe not have seen a drone at that distance. It gets pretty hard to see a drone sort of 500 meters plus.
I wouldn't try and push a smaller drone that distance. Like legally, you need to be able to see it. And the M300 being a 7.5 kilo drone, you can actually see it and orientate its direction. But everyone's vision is different. So
for listeners out there, the M300 is quite large. It's probably what you compare it to, maybe a large wingspan of a bird, like an eagle kind of size width. You think roughly?
Easily.
We did have a wedgie go on one recently, so they're definitely about the same size.
So there you go. There's some confirmation for you. So the M300 at a distance is obviously a lot easier to see than, say, Phantom 4 RTK that's white and about a third of the size.
Or a Mavic Mini.
Or a Mavic Mini, yeah.
I would not trust that far out, but
no, I'm sure we'll talk more about equipment. We definitely got it covered in our next episode, so we'll do a deep dive on that one for sure.
For that one.
Yeah, sure.
Cool. So GSD, ground sampling distance. I know Danny's got something we prepared earlier.
Sounds like something at a buffet, actually. Can I just get the ground sampling distance of that one, please? Thanks.
And there's the Danny explanation on GSD, everybody.
All right, so I'm just going to do a little screen share, and Ty or Sean will actually talk about what I'm showing here, if it allows me to.
Well, you don't want to talk about it, Danny?
No, but
since you actually shot this.
You can't multitask, I think, explaining and driving.
I can not multitask at all. I'm horrible at it. Give me one task, I'll do it great. Give me two, forget about it. So I can watch the drone and tell you a whole story about what I'm doing in the meantime. Anyway. So here we have the famous Waverley Reservoir in Transspec. Hands down my choice of platform. It gives superior models in my opinion. This model itself was about 300 gigapixels. So I think it's about 4,000 images, which at 45 megapixels is a lot of data. We do have multiple amounts of this data set in here, so I might show a few different versions of that, but the GSD of this, or resolution as we say, was about 1.5 mil. So you can almost see the paint flaking off the actual model itself.
Well, you can see the paint flaking off the actual model.
The smaller the GSD, the higher the quality, basically.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Yeah.
Obviously, what comes with that is more processing, more power to process, more imagery, more data.
But it's also giving, obviously, a higher quality asset for SMEs and inspectors to actually work off too.
Yeah. So in this sense, if the inspectors could mark up saying, okay, there's a whole bunch of spalding on this section right here. There's mold growing that could be going internal. There's so many issues with the data set when you start digging into these kind of resolutions, and you can see pretty much everything about it. There you go. There's the mold.
That's definitely very good.
Is it worth, because I know that a couple of the other data sets of this model were captured also with different drones.
Yes.
So the GSD would have been different on some of those?
So I'll show a good example. So I've got a data set here using the Skydio.
So we're basically looking at the same model, but two different timeframes for the listeners.
So the model on the left.
Side by side.
So model on the left was with the M300. Model on the right is the Skydio. So much smaller sensor, but also able to get a lot closer safely. The same GSD was aimed for, but obviously being the Skydio, much smaller camera, you're not going to get the same detail as the 300.
So for listeners out there too that maybe can't see the screen, even the people that can see the screen, obviously we'll probably go a bit more into software in one of the later episodes about asset inspection, but it's designed so that you can have a side-by-side view of different timeframes of your asset and be able to refer back to, I guess, different defects at different timeframes to see if they're getting worse or they've been repaired and so on.
And just for the people that actually are watching the screen, about 30 seconds ago, I didn't realize I was looking at the same data set on the second screen. So now's the difference between the Skydio and the M300. And it's a very big difference you can see now.
Yeah, definitely. And so what was the GSD on the Skydio model, Danny?
That was aimed to be 2.5 mil using the 3D scan. It had to take a lot more images to try and get that resolution.
Yeah.
But in comparison, we'll be able to see how many images this model has in it in a second. For anyone that's interested as well in the software, we could talk about more in detail later. Just a shameless plug for Transspec right here.
And we have dedicated a whole episode to software platforms.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about pros and cons of the different platforms and how, if you're starting or more experienced, what's suited for you.
So essentially, every one of those orange dots or orange positions is a camera position, and how many photos were part of this data set. As I said, being a full frame 45 megapixel camera, that data really adds up really quickly. Compared to the Skydio, this one, give it a second to load up. If it wants to, my internet's not happy today.
So we're basically looking at the different camera positions from Skydio and M300.
Yeah, you'll notice as well, the Skydio's capture is more complete. It seems that it just captures perfectly around a structure. The difference with the Skydio, obviously you can see very much, is tried to capture the tower as well, but that was my bad. But as you can see, the images are a lot closer, a lot more defined, but in the smaller camera, it has to get closer to get a much better GSD.
I actually haven't looked at a structure. I looked at a tower. I haven't looked at a structure that the camera points captured by a Skydio.
There's the difference of it.
It's quite incredible, actually. For the listeners, there's basically all these little orange, I guess, square polygons to show you where each image was captured around the structure. And the polygons on the, I guess, the little squares on this one, captured by a Skydio, basically look like a little basket, more or less, encasing the asset itself, whereas the M300 was more following a very similar path along the whole asset up and down, doing it sort of Pac-Man grids and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
it's more linear, the 300.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And in saying that as well, the Skydio capture is purely autonomous. All you're doing for 3D scan, the app that Skydio has developed, which is absolutely amazing, and anyone can capture pretty awesome models. All you're doing is setting 4 corners or 4 pillars in the whole in the flight plan, and essentially hitting go. It does everything in between. You do have to change your batteries, unfortunately.
Damn it.
One day they'll come up with a way to fix that.
We're not out of work yet, boys. But in saying that, for an autonomous capture, it's pretty awesome, I'd like to say. That's no hands on it at all. Then again,
definitely, and probably worth mentioning too. I mean, for the listeners out there, I mean, there's a lot that we do capture automated. There's a lot of automation software to do for capture, but there's also a lot that's captured manually as well. So to be able to do something completely autonomous, it's quite incredible.
Cool.
Right on.
So thanks, Danny. So I think that was just to wrap up what we've covered off, just talking about traditional ways of conducting asset inspections, how drones can help. Certainly a great market space for anyone looking to get into it. We've obviously talked about some of the key terms that'll come across asset inspection, like RTK and PPK, and I'm sure there's lots more, and introduction on GSD, and obviously Danny showed us on using Trendspec, what a good different flights using M300 and Skydio, and give you a good idea of GSD. So that pretty much sums up episode 1. Our next episode, so you can have a listen to, is we'll definitely be talking about some of the equipment we tend to use to conduct asset inspection. So if it's something interests you, please join us. And once again, feel free to send any comments to us, because we'd love to get any feedback so we can improve on our upcoming episodes. Thank you, gentlemen. Always good.
Have a good one, guys.
Until the next one.
Peace out. Have a great night, guys.